Kia ora, hello, I'm Philip Duncan with your Climate Watch update for the month of March, brought to you by ruralweather.co.nz, Weather Watch, and of course our business partners at IBM. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got lows up in the tropics still affecting us. We've got big high pressure zones coming in. Let's make sense of it. Now I'm going to talk about this map a little bit later on in the broadcast, but basically this is the wind map, but it's got UV rays on top of it. So the UV rays, that's the part I'll talk about later on. But for now, look at this easterly flow coming through here. This has been around for a little while now, and it's partially responsible for the big rain events across the eastern side of Australia, which, by the way, don't really show a sign of easing anytime soon. It's moved further southwards, but it's going to come back to Queensland because of the easterly wind flow coming in at the moment. So that's one of the main features we're going to talk about, but also the high pressure belt south of Aussie, south of New Zealand, that's driving in this very dry airflow for New Zealand, but also this easterly, this wet, humid easterly coming in for Australia. But really, La Nina's the main talking points over the last few months, and La Nina's peaked. That's probably the biggest headline coming out of today, is that La Nina is really starting to come to an end. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly map, and what it shows you is a classic La Nina setup at the moment, where the warm water on the surface gets blown over to the western Pacific, and so the eastern side cooler than average, the western side warmer than average. It's especially warmer than average between Tasmania and New Zealand and up to around about the Cook Islands. That's an area where we've seen some tropical storms forming, like Dovey and Cody, and those two systems were pretty significant. Dovey was the one that hit New Zealand, Cody just missed us. So we've got a lot of warm warm sea surface conditions up here to the north, but also out here towards Australia. That's helping to encourage the heavy rain that's falling in eastern areas. So what is happening with La Nina? Like I say, it's peaked, and the Bureau of Meteorology, which coincidentally are actually updating these maps later on today, but I don't expect them to change much because they've been really accurate for the past few months, showing that by around about March, La Nina would be starting to ease, starting to go back to neutral, and that's really what we do see by May, and certainly by winter, we're back into that neutral zone. So what does that mean? It means the sea surface temperatures, for the most part, have returned to a more normal phase, although we are still getting these marine heat waves carrying on in the New Zealand area, which takes me to these two maps. So while the general, sea surface temperatures are returning closer to a normal level, there are parts around New Zealand that are not. So let me show you the map here on the right-hand side first of all. The areas in red, that's showing the sort of the marine heat wave, how much warmer than average it actually is. So a number of coastal parts of New Zealand are warmer than they should be, which means when a low does actually come in, like we saw with ex-tropical cyclone Dovey, a lot of energy is retained in that storm as it comes over those warmer than average sea surface conditions. This map just simply shows the temperatures getting up, around the late teens and early 20s across much of the North Island. That warm keep saying weather, I mean sea temperatures. Warm sea temperatures continues all the way down the west coast as well. Probably a little bit cooler if you go for a swim around Otago Peninsula. A big thank you to Met Ocean and the Moana Project. You can find the Moana Project very easily online, and these maps you can freely look at whenever you want. So let's move along and take a look at the forecast for the month of March. What is on the way? Here is week one, and we put into these boxes high pressure in red boxes, low pressure in blue boxes. Just helps you at a glance kind of work out, are we getting more high pressure, or is it mixed up, or more low pressure? What is on the way? So what we're seeing here is that tropical system around New Caledonia and the low pressure zones around the eastern side of Australia, which have been bringing the flooding. So all that rain is up here to the north. Maybe not so much around Queensland at the moment when we show you this map, because by now a lot of that rain has slid further down towards New South Wales, but it will likely return up there. Got a cyclone around Broome, got a possible cyclone forming up here around New Caledonia, but really the high pressure zones to the south, big driving force for both New Zealand and Australia, because they've been down here a lot through the last month or two, drives in these big easterlies for Australia, anticyclonic wind going around the centre, and also the odd cooler southerly coming in for the New Zealand area, which we certainly had for the very last day of February, yesterday, when compared to the day we recorded this. So we have had some cold weather in the New Zealand area, but as that high rolls back through, things will start to warm back up. By week two, we've still got tropical energy to the north, so there is a chance of rain, but it's a very fine line between that rainmaker there and the high pressure belt parked out over the Chatham Islands and extending back. Still in week 2, we've got rainmakers along the eastern side of Australia, and as you can see, a bit more perhaps back up around Queensland, which isn't that great, and more high pressure coming in from the Indian Ocean south of Australia, and that's been the pattern we've seen over summer, driving in some very dry weather for parts of New Zealand. Now, when we get to week 3, it's quite messy. There's no big low pressure zones moving through, and there's no particularly big high pressure zones other than this one high in here. It's quite a good strong one. I mean, there's another one out here, but they're quite small. This is a bigger one, but it's well south of Australia. This one out to sea, mostly over the Chatham Islands. So New Zealand's on the edge of high pressure, Australia's on the edge of high pressure as we get to the middle part of the month and move through week 3. So there could be some downpours, but generally speaking, high pressure looks to dominate, at least in the New Zealand area. So let's take a look at the rain now that we're forecasting. Here's the first week of March, rainfall departure from normal. Red, drier than average, white, normal rainfall for this time of the year, and blue clearly leans wetter than normal. So you can see that cyclone and the remnants of it coming through into the Australian deserts. That'll help bring in some rain. But these areas don't need more rain. They want it to dry out. Unfortunately, we do still see more rain coming in for the Queensland area, and plenty of it down around New South Wales, even coming down into Victoria as we go into that first week of March. Now, over in the New Zealand area, high pressure dominates, so it's mostly dry. We're not really seeing much, and that rain in Australia keeps going that direction. It's not coming our direction, not with those La Nina easterlies blowing through. So here is the rainfall totals. Right through till March 16, this is what we expect, and you'll notice that there is some heavy rain up here from that tropical system, and it does come down, as we saw in that week 2 map, gets very close to northern New Zealand. So these areas in here are showing 100 to 150 millimetres, but a very fine line between that heavy rain and very dry weather through central New Zealand, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4 millimetres, maybe 5 millimetres. Not much coming into this area here. The only thing that would change that would be an afternoon thunderstorm, which would be quite localised, and that could really blow your rainfall numbers up to 50 millimetres maybe, but that'll be isolated. For the most part, New Zealand's actually looking quite dry, and when you take away those offshore rainmakers, there isn't a lot showing up for New Zealand, but there's plenty more rain coming in for Australia. Sydney's getting up to that 200 millimetre mark, as are parts of Queensland. So that's unfortunate that we are not yet finished with the wet weather over there. So just a close-up view of New Zealand here. Very dry in these 2 black boxes. This is the area that has between 0.2 and 5 to 10 millimetres right through until March 16th. You can see that tropical rainmaker gets very close, but these areas in red, I mean, that's around 60 millimetres of rain, but just a couple of lines away, 20 millimetres of rain. So it's a fine line. And if you're a gambling person, you probably wouldn't throw money on rain coming and soaking your property, maybe over here in East Cape. But even then, it's pretty borderline that most of it might stay out at sea. Southland doesn't have a lot of rain on the way either, but maybe 20 millimetres or 30 millimetres coming through over the next couple of weeks. So here's the 3-month rainfall outlook. This is from our partners at IBM. And this is just a snapshot. It's sort of like, blur your eyes a wee bit and take a look at where most of the rain will fall. And what it's showing is over the next 3 months, March, April, May, going through autumn, the North Island should see some more rain coming back. Leans wetter. Doesn't lean a lot wetter though, only a few millimetres wetter, but even if it's normal rainfall, that'll be very welcome because we've had so much below rainfall in the upper North Island for 4 full years. We've had some rain this year, but we're still in a deficit. Overall, the top of New Zealand needs some rain, so I hope we get some. Australia is certainly seeing a higher risk of rain over the next few months, more than usual. And temperature-wise, well, this hasn't changed in about a year. It is consistently showing New Zealand leaning 0.5 degree to 1 degree warmer than average. That includes the cold changes that come in as well. So this is showing New Zealand leaning, the key is behind me, sorry, but it's leaning, up to about 1 degree warmer than average. That's basically where we've been for the past few months and the past few years, so no real surprises there. And on the Australian side, the extra cloud and the easterlies off the sea, that's why it's looking a little bit cooler through New South Wales and Queensland. It's the extra cloud and the rainmakers that are coming through, plus the easterlies, which come off the sea instead of the westerlies, which come out of the desert. So I said I'd talk about this map before we finish. So this is the map showing ultraviolet rays, and the areas with the strongest concentration of them are up here in this sort of circle of pink and purple. And what we're finding now that the Earth is curving away from the sun, the southern hemisphere is curving away from the sun more, so our days are getting shorter. As it does that, this round blob of UV ray starts to go further up the map, and it starts to go over north of the equator and starts to ease the further south you are on the globe as we go into their summer and we go into our winter. So what we're noticing now is the extreme levels up here in the pink purple, which comes all the way down to the North Island, starting to ease a little bit, but it's still extreme. Even though it's moving away from us, New Zealand still has extreme UV rays when the sun's out in the middle of the day. Even when it's cloudy, still very high, and very high all the way down to the lower South Island. The reason why there's a gap here in the middle, that's that tropical storm that's just near New Caledonia, so the thick cloud cover and rainmakers, that's the reason why you're seeing green and yellow in there. But generally speaking, this is a big reflection of the sun, and it's shining right here. Obviously it's shining over the whole planet at certain times, it shines on one side, but the concentration, the highest level of UV rays are here towards the equator, but it's still extreme in New Zealand. Worth sharing that because we do have very high melanoma rates in New Zealand, and so you need to be aware that it's because of this stuff, the high UV rays coming from our sun, and it stays extreme. Even though now we're going into March and going into autumn, it's still extreme in parts of New Zealand. That is all from me. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again in 1 month. We'll see you then.